Hi, my name is Sarah Lamper, and this is my informative speech for my Communications 202 class. These are my audience members. Tori is on the left and Nicole is on the right. And today I will be talking about how evidence is handled at a crime scene by detectives. The first thing that detectives must do when entering a crime scene is to preserve the scene with minimal disturbance or contamination of the evidence, and the initial responding officer should approach and enter the scene with caution and be very observant of the scene and where evidence is placed when they arrive. Officers must obtain consent before entering a crime scene or obtain a search warrant. Unless evidence is in danger of being destroyed in any way, then they are allowed to enter without consent or a search warrant. Documentation of the scene is the most important part. Everything at the scene has to be documented prior to the collection of evidence, and documentation consists of taking photos, making notes, making sketches, and taking measurements of the crime scene. The initial phase of investigation includes securing the scene and protecting the evidence that is present. The officers will survey and walk through to establish the boundaries of the scene and observe any visible evidence, and they will begin taking notes on the scene as well as overall photos and beginning a rough sketch. The next phase is the collection phase. Officers must minimize the movement and maintain security of any evidence found at the scene. They will continue taking notes of the scene. They will take mid-range and close-up photos and document the location and position of evidence found and start to develop their plan for collecting and preserving the evidence that is found. The final phase of investigation, officers will continue taking notes. They'll take overall measurements and do a final search of the scene. They bring in a fresh pair of eyes to make sure that they didn't miss anything on the scene. And when they're finished, they will protect and seal off the scene in case they need to come back to investigate further. There are three main forms of documentation when at a crime scene. The first is taking notes, the second is taking photographs, and the third is making sketches and diagrams of the scene as it was found. The most important thing for detectives to remember is that if it is not documented, it did not happen. So if they don't have it on record in any way, they can't use the evidence that they have in court when trying to prove their case. Notes taken at a crime scene have to be very detailed. They describe the who, what, and where of the crime scene, and describe the visual aspect of the scene, as well as detailed actions of the investigation that is being held. Types of photos taken at the scene are overall photos, so these are large portions of the scene from various angles. Typically, if a crime scene is in a room, officers will take photos from each corner of the room, as well as each wall of the room in order to make sure that they're not missing any angles of the crime scene. Next, they will take mid-range photos, which show items' locations in relation to other items, and will still cover a larger portion of the crime scene. And last, they'll take close-up photos, which are individual items photographed with and without a scale. Crime scene sketches are another important part of investigation. The first is a rough sketch, which I have an example of here. A rough sketch is completed at the scene, it's not to scale, and it's just an overall first draft of what they see when they first arrive at the scene. And another type that is done after the rough sketch is the intermediate sketch, which I have another example of. And this is a cleaned up version. It has more details, it has measurements on the sketch, and it can be used to reconstruct the scene if needed. What is done with evidence after it has been collected? It is stored in an evidence locker while the case is being built, and appropriate evidence will be presented in the court when the case goes to trial. And this will include the sketches, the photos, the notes, everything that the officers have done while at the crime scene. To conclude, if a case is built well and all the proper actions are taken when investigating the crime can be proven and the suspect will be prosecuted properly. Thank you to my audience members for listening today, and that's it.